Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're continuing our conversation with former FBI Director James Comey. I want to pick up where we left off, which was that Senate intelligence report. This is a bipartisan report, meaning Republicans signed off on it. This was 3 years long, and the conclusion here was that Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort represented a, quote, grave counterintelligence threat to the U.S. because of his close work with Russian intelligence officer Konstantin Kilimnik. This goes farther than what Mueller concluded and made public. Why? Why is the public just now hearing about it?
Because the Senate Intelligence Committee was looking at all information they could gather. Mueller was approaching it as a prosecutor, trying to see what evidence he could bring into court to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt. And so the Senate Intelligence Committee could look much more broadly, and as you said, came to this conclusion that the head of Trump's campaign was funneling information to a Russian intelligence officer, someone he likely knew was a Russian intelligence officer. Let that sink in, and then ask yourself, so there was nothing to investigate here, as Bill Barr says? It was a hoax? The Republicans have exploded that nonsense.
The report, though, also was critical of your old agency, the FBI. It said your bureau should have done more to alert DNC officials that Russian hackers had accessed their servers. Why didn't the FBI do this? This was a national security threat happening under the nose of the FBI.
Yeah, I understand that. And that's fair criticism. I think at the time, our folks thought that just telling an institution that the Russians are inside your house was enough. But I think part of what may have led to a lack of urgency at the DNC and at the FBI is that nobody anticipated this wasn't normal intelligence gathering by the Russians. This was an effort to weaponize. And if anybody had seen that, I think they would have yelled a little more loudly.
Was that a mistake on your part? I mean, how did the FBI miss that this was an active measures campaign by a foreign intelligence service?
That's a great question. I think the simple answer is because it had never happened before. But if I were still director of the FBI, that wouldn't be a good enough answer. I hope they're taking a look back across the intelligence community and asking, so why didn't we imagine that the Russians might do this? But the truth is that we didn't. Nobody in the intelligence community did.
When you were FBI director, you never imagined this scenario? I mean, don't you think this was a mistake on your part?
I sure think it was a mistake. I'm not going to quibble on words. Yeah, it was a miss. I don't know why. It didn't occur to us that the Russians were doing something that they had never done before, which is to weaponize and actually fire stolen material at our democratic process. And looking back in hindsight, it seems obvious. I don't know the answer as to why nobody in the intelligence community, none of the analysts saw this coming. And it ought to be something that we're asking ourselves.
Are we still this vulnerable?
Yes. In a different way, I'm sure the Russians will use different tactics because we figured out what they were last time. They achieved their objectives in the last election. They've done incredibly well under President Trump. They want him to stay in office. They'll be coming again. And the problem for us as Americans is you can't effectively stop a threat that the president won't even acknowledge exists. And so, sure, they're going to be in our house again, messing with us. The only way we're going to kick Putin out of our elections is to elect Joe Biden president. So someone finally puts real pain on the Russians.
What does real pain look like? I mean, we've been warned by the U.S. intelligence community that interference is happening again. President Trump is talking about election interference in very different terms. I actually want to play for you something that he said this week. He said that this will be the most fraudulent election in U.S. history, and he told this to Fox News.
We're going to have everything. We're going to have sheriffs, and we're going to have law enforcement, and we're going to have, hopefully, U.S. attorneys, and we're going to have everybody and attorney generals.
He's talking about fraud at the ballot box. He's talking about fraud in the mail. He's talking about fraud by receiving a ballot in the first place. What the president just described in that soundbite is frankly illegal in many states. It's up to local authorities when it comes to sending out local law enforcement. But he's making clear what he wants to see happen. What do you make of what he's laying out?
Well, I'm sure the next question Fox News asked was, what are the facts that support your allegations of fraud? And there were crickets. I trust state, local, and federal law enforcement to honor their oath to the rule of law and to not be part of suppressing votes. There's a legitimate role for law enforcement to play in connection with elections, and I'm confident that the men and women in law enforcement at all levels will abide their oath.
In other words, not do this. In terms of,
this is America. We don't, at least we don't anymore. We did it a whole lot to African Americans when I was a child. We don't anymore use cops to scare people away from polling places. We just don't do it. And I'm confident that police officers around this country are not interested in being part of an illegitimate effort like that.
I have to ask you, the Justice Department is investigating the investigation into 2016. Do you know if you are a witness or a target, or have you sat for an interview with John Durham as part of the investigation?
Yeah, I have no idea. I've had no contact with him and haven't talked to him.
Do you believe that that means you are a target?
I can't imagine that I'm a target. I saw the news report that John Brennan was a witness. Given that I know what happened during 2016, which was a bunch of people trying to do the right thing, consistent with the law, I'm not worried at all about that investigation of the investigation. Next, I'm sure will be an investigation of the investigation of the investigation. They just want to have an investigation to talk about.
I want to ask you about a tweet you sent this week. You sent out a picture of yourself wearing a T-shirt that said, more women should be elected, more votes for women. Of course, it is the week honoring ratification of the 19th Amendment. But it drew this response that we just put up for our viewers from Hillary Clinton, who is just sort of making a smirk. I know she said in the past that she thought she was on the verge of winning in 2016 until you reopened that email investigation. Do you see this as contradictory? Do you regret what happened then? Because she clearly sees this as a contradiction for you to say now.
Yeah, I think it's pretty funny, and I get why she would send something like that. She's better at Twitter than I am. But I regret only being involved in the 2016 election. We were stuck, and I think we made the right decisions, choosing between terrible options. And so I wasn't trying, nor was anybody else in the FBI trying to elect or not elect anyone. And I hope more women get elected to office. I'm proud of that shirt that my daughters and my wife gave me, and I think it's time for more women to be leaders in this country. We'll all be better off.
Well, we agree with you on that point. Thank you very much, Jim Comey, for your time. We will be right back. We turn now to our continuing coverage of the coronavirus with CBS News national correspondent Mark Strassman, who reports from Atlanta, Georgia.
At COVID University, partying students have inflamed viral outbreaks, fuming administrators, and campus anxiety.
We also have a lot of older faculty and staff, and we're all vulnerable.
Dozens of schools already have reversed plans. They've switched undergraduates to all virtual classrooms and offered a course in consequences. Syracuse suspended 23 partiers, Purdue 36, St. Olaf in Minnesota 17. North Carolina State University has had multiple COVID clusters.
We've seen behaviors off campus that frankly are inconsistent with our community standards and have had an impact on our ability to go forward.
But human nature is always the X factor, and fingers crossed is a poor COVID defense. Students have blamed administrators for poor planning. At Notre Dame, 372 people have tested positive. The student paper's front page editorial, "Don't make us write obituaries." Across America, fewer people are dying from COVID. Death rates are down or flat in 38 states and up in 12. A month ago, deaths were up in 26 states. But America's heartland has more COVID troubles. Rising cases in 12 states, including North Dakota, Wyoming, Kansas, and Missouri. South Dakota's average daily caseloads are up 58%. Just 1 week ago, the state hosted a biker rally with 250,000 attendees.
Let us play! Let us play!
Feeling normal again. It's behind the push to play fall sports. In Division I college football's most competitive tier, there are 130 schools. 54 programs so far have shut down this fall. But some schools require testing of all arriving students. COVID stampeded on campus anyway. And with this virus, getting it wrong in the first few weeks fuels a crisis.
Georgia's COVID case is improving. Like other southern states, it's been a hotspot for months. But now the Southeast faces another danger, a pair of tropical storms named Marco and Laura. They're both expected to strengthen into hurricanes, potentially complicating the region's efforts to bring the virus under control. Margaret?
Mark Strassman in Atlanta. Thank you. We turn now to former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who joins us from Westport, Connecticut. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
New cases have dropped below 50,000 for about the 8th day. That seems, according to Johns Hopkins, a positive development. But the CDC director says it's really middle America that's getting stuck. Where do you think we are?
Well, we're seeing some signs of good news here. We're seeing cases fall across the country, across the Sun Belt where the epidemic was. We're seeing deaths start to fall, and I think we're going to see deaths fall below 1,000 a day. They've been persistently at above 1,000 a day now for almost 4 weeks. And we're seeing hospitalizations fall, which is probably the most important indicator to watch. They fell below 40,000 for the first time in a very long time. And this is being driven by declines in the Sun Belt, where the coronavirus really was epidemic, the sort of second wave, if you will, of the epidemic, the first being located in the New York tri-state region. But we're seeing more cases build in the Midwest and the West. And what the concern is that if there is sort of a third wave, a third iteration of the national epidemic, it could be more diffuse spread across a broader section of the Midwest and the West, because the cases are building in those parts of the country. And that's what's concerning people right now.
I want to ask you about some of the things that the president has said regarding your old agency, the FDA. Yesterday, he posted a tweet that I want to show our viewers. He said, the deep state or whoever over at the FDA is making it very difficult for drug companies to get people in order to test the vaccines and therapeutics. They're hoping to delay the answer until after November 3rd. Most must focus on speed. It sounds like the president is directly accusing the FDA of political motivations. What is he talking about?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what he's talking about. I can tell you about my direct experience at the agency. I served in that agency 3 times, twice under President Bush and once as the commissioner for 2 years under President Trump. And when it comes to regulatory decision-making in that agency, it's a foundational truth that what guides that agency is science and a deeply seated sense of public health mission that permeates that agency. It's a part of the esprit de corps of the staff of that agency. And I know that they know the urgency of the moment. They put out 60 guidance documents defining new ways to bring products to the market more quickly. There are 750 drugs under mid or late stages of clinical development, clinical trials right now. So I firmly reject the idea that they would slow walk anything or accelerate anything for that matter based on any kind of political consideration and any consideration other than what's best for the public health and a real sense of mission to patients.
Well,
as for the clinical trials, they... Please.
Well, the chief of staff to the president doubled down on that today. He says sometimes you have to make them feel the heat if they do not see the light. He said a number of bureaucrats don't see the urgency. What urgency? What is the FDA being pressured to do?
Well, look, I think a lot of that was about plasma, that tweet. I think the president scoped into that tweet a comment on vaccines, but I will tell you, and I sit on the board of Pfizer, one of the 2 U.S. companies furthest along in developing a vaccine. The vaccine trials have enrolled very fast. Moderna and Pfizer, the 2 U.S. manufacturers who are the furthest ahead, enrolled 25,000 patients into those trials in the 4 weeks that those trials have been stood up, and they've really only been enrolling in earnest for 3 weeks. That's extraordinary. So to say that these products aren't moving at really historic pace, I think is wrong. There were delays or perceived delays in bringing authorizing plasma under an emergency use authorization. It was reported this week that NIH had misgivings about FDA going forward with that authorization. But there's reasons people have some questions about that. The trial that's going to be based on, 70,000 patients, wasn't a very rigorously done trial. It was an open label study where everyone got treated. So it's hard to draw conclusions. I believe plasma is probably beneficial. It's probably weakly beneficial in the setting of this treatment. But I think some people wanted to see more rigorous data to ground that decision. And I think that's part of what is going on here with respect to that tweet and questions about the FDA decision-making. But I think the FDA is on firm ground, taking their time to try to closely evaluate that information.
The White House has said there will be a major therapeutic breakthrough on the virus announced today. Do you know what that is?
Well, I would guess it's the emergency use authorization for plasma. The issue here, though, is that patients are getting it. More than 70,000 patients, again, have been dosed with that. So it's available. What the emergency use authorization will allow is probably more commercial distribution and it will allow manufacturers of plasma products to more easily recoup the cost. Now, what plasma is basically taking the antibodies from people who've recovered, so it's a blood product, and infusing them in people who are sick. And if you use it early enough in the course of the disease, there is some precedent for it being beneficial in the treatment of viruses. And so it is a good therapeutic to have in the overall armamentarium, but the bottom line is it's widely available right now. Patients are getting it. The EUA, the Emergency Use Authorization, will enable probably easier access in certain settings, but it's incremental. And, you know, incremental gains are important here, but we need to view it for what it is.
Quickly, before we let you go, I want to understand this study that came out this week showing from the Journal of Pediatrics that children have a more significant role in community spread than believed initially. Does this mean kids are more contagious than we thought?
Well, I think this study was consistent with other studies. What it showed, it was nasopharyngeal swabs, so it was swabs from children comparing them to swabs from adults. There were some problems with the study in that they were swabbing the kids early in the course of the disease, comparing them to adults who were swabbed late in the course of the disease, albeit adults who were very sick, who were hospitalized. And they found that the kids had very high viral levels, in many cases higher than the adults. I think it confirms what other studies have shown, which is that children do shed virus and they can transmit the virus. If they can't transmit the virus, we wouldn't be seeing these outbreaks in day camps in Missouri and Georgia. We saw the situation in Ohio where there was an outbreak in a church service and children were in the chain of transmission. So children can transmit the virus. The presumption is that when they're asymptomatic, they're less likely to transmit it. And that's true of adults, too. The CDC says that when adults are asymptomatic, they're also less likely to transmit the infection.
Dr. Scott Gottlieb, always good to talk to you. Thank you for your time. We'll be back in a moment. We go now to Tucson, where classes at the University of Arizona start tomorrow with 4 instructional options, including in-person learning. Joining us is University President and Dr. Robert Robbins. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Margaret.
Sure. How many students are coming back for in-person, in-class instruction, and will all of them be tested?
So all of the students that are living in our dormitories are being tested. That's mandatory. We've tested over 5,000 students with 26 positives, so that's about 0.3%. The other students that are living off campus are being strongly encouraged to be tested. And in total, there'll be about 5,000 students that will be taking essential courses face-to-face, in person. Those would be things like organic chemistry lab, physics lab, gross anatomy lab, those kind of things. And we think we're going to have about 30,000, 28 to 30,000 students coming back to the Tucson area. Normally, we would have 45,000.
And your office told us that the only mandate for testing is for those living on campus. You just mentioned dorms there.
Right.
It looks like 5,000 of your students live in dorms. That means the majority don't live on campus. So, so isn't this exposing everyone if you can't mandate testing for those who don't live in a dorm?
Well, I think that what we're going to do is we will try to test everyone that comes on campus. What I would like, and of course what we would all like, is a 10-second, 10-cent test that we could test everyone every day. We think that we can test everybody who comes back to campus in person, but we can't test them every day using an antigen test, which is what we're using to look at our students that are coming into the dorms. We think that we've got a random testing protocol that we've got in place, but I would like to see us test at least once a week everybody who comes on campus face to face.
So Notre Dame mandated testing for students on campus, and I'm sure you know that they have had an outbreak that has caused them to put things on hold for at least a few weeks. If they tried and failed, why do you think your university will be different?
Well, I think that we've got extensive testing policies. I think they did the same thing that we did, which is test students when they came into the dorms. But I'm not sure if they were testing, because they'd only been in class, just like at UNC Chapel Hill, only been in class for a week or so. I think the big issue is off-campus activity. I think we all know that we can control things in the classroom and on campus and in the student union, and not having large gatherings of people on campus in official venues. The problem is what I've seen is that others, such as Kansas, even Arizona State, other universities, Purdue, have gone aggressively off campus to try to break up large gatherings and parties. And that's where most of the transmission has occurred.
Would you expel a student if they violated one of your requests? I mean, how do you force people to behave in their own best interest when they're teenagers and in their early 20s?
Sure. No, I understand. And I think so to answer your question first, we've got a face covering policy. We're anticipating there'll be some people who refuse to cover their face because of their expression of their individuality and freedom. But that is going to that'll go through the Dean of Students and Code of Conduct. And yes, they can be expelled. What I think we're moving into is we've done a very good job of testing, contact tracing. We've got COVID-19 Watch, which is a Google, Apple app that uses Bluetooth, and we're the first university to use that. So we feel good about our education, and we've been on with a weekly briefing every week and over social media. I think we're going to continue that preventative therapy in education, but we've got to switch quickly into the treatment mode. We know there are going to be spikes in cases, so we've got to be able to handle them.
Very quickly, when do you hit the brakes? What's your threshold?
When we can't mitigate and handle, if we get overwhelmed with cases where we don't have enough room for isolation, our hospitals are starting to get capacity, overcapacity, where we can't surge into ICUs and if someone were to get really sick. So we're going to be watching the numbers every day, and if we run out of isolation beds and we can't handle it and people are getting really ill, then we'll pull the plug.
Dr. Robbins, thank you for your time. We'll be right back. We want to leave you today on an uplifting note. There is a new arrival here in Washington. Giant panda Mei Xiang gave birth to a new cub at the National Zoo on Friday, and the yet-to-be-named cub has been called a miracle, given how rare a panda pregnancy is, plus the mother's advanced age. Proof that some of 2020's surprises can actually be good ones. And we need more of them. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.